The Indianapolis Colts finished off training camp today with their final practice, a joint practice in Cincinnati with the Bengals. Today, we're going over what happened in Cincinnati, including one injury update that's a big disappointment for a lot of Colts fans, I'm sure, but could provide some clarity on what the final roster is going to look like. My name's Noah Gebert. I'm from Horseshoe Huddle, and this is the Shoehorn podcast, a live show where I sit here and talk with you guys about all things Colts. We've got a few topics lined up already, but if you have a question or comment you want to be discussed on the show, just drop it in the chat. We will talk about it for sure. I see Andrew already in the chat. Some Colts pride there. Appreciate you, Andrew. We'll start off today just going over some of the injury updates that we got at camp today, the final practice. I guess we'll save the big one for last, which I'm sure everybody's here. Everybody wants to talk about. I know Twitter was buzzing about that. Um, but some other things outside of that, Ashton Doolin finally came back to practice, was dealing with a hamstring injury. I believe for a while, kept him out about a week and a half. And really, he's one of those guys fighting for wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 with DJ Montgomery. So it's good to see him back in the action. Really didn't get to spend much time with Coach Steichen last season. So cool to see him getting some reps. Juju Brents stayed out with that nose injury he sustained in the preseason game. Don't expect that to be anything serious, but they're not going to rush a guy back. Tanner Bortolini had the toe injury; he was out. Trey Sermon still dealing with that hamstring, so that's your RB2 behind Jonathan Taylor that you're going to need to get healthy over the next few weeks. Then Cameron McGrone, a depth linebacker, also sat out today. And then the big one we've got was Jelani Woods. We knew he was dealing with a toe injury after the last preseason game, but Shane Steichen, after practice today, comes out and says that he's going to miss some time. Sources are saying he's going to be out for a little bit, getting surgery on that toe. So we don't really have a timetable for sure on how long he's going to be out, but we know it's going to be considerable time that we all expect to stretch into the regular season. So I guess, yeah, good news, bad news, mostly bad news. But yeah, Jelani Woods is kind of that high upside guy in the tight end room that you hoped would be kind of tight end one and take over and really fill out that potential freak athlete, the 10.0 Raz that we remember. Of course, like it's stereotypical Ballard picking those high athlete guys. But yeah, he's going to be out. He missed all of last season. He's going to miss at least the beginning of this season. And there was already some questions on whether he was going to make the roster or not, whether they were going to keep 5, whether they were going to keep him or Will Mallory. So yeah, this injury where he's going to be missing some time at the beginning of the season really kind of cleans things out there. So maybe he's an IR candidate. You do that on cut down day. This year it's cut down day. You don't have to put him on the 53 and then do it after he clears waivers or after the waivers period is over. You can do that on cut down day. And he would be eligible to return, I believe, after 6 weeks. But I'm not sure what the timetable is. Might be longer than that, might be shorter than that. But yeah, we'll just see how they handle that. But either way, I think that means Will Mallory, his spot on the 53 seems pretty clear because I think they're going in with 4 tight ends. They kept 5 last year, but they had all 5. Hey, Sean, welcome to the chat, Sean. Appreciate you being here. Richie asking if they will cut Jelani Woods. Richie, there's only 2 ways they can handle that, and that's put him on IR and kind of hope for a return later in the year, or cut ties completely. I feel like it'd be strange for them to move on so fast when they have the option of putting him on that IR list and not taking up a roster spot. So yeah, I mean, obviously disappointing that he wasn't here last season. He didn't really impress in the summer. He didn't impress in preseason. He hasn't really taken a hold of kind of that spot that you would hope he takes. But I don't think it's so severe that they would cut him at this point. I believe when he was kind of in that roster battle with Will Mallory, and you were wondering whether they were going to keep 4 guys or whether they were going to keep 5 guys, I think it was a safe question to ask. It was pretty fair to ask that, whether they're going to keep him or they're going to keep Mallory, but they can keep both right now because they're going to throw him on that injured list. A shout out to Drake in the chat. Appreciate you, buddy. He's also saying that Doolin kicks ass in special teams. Yes, that is absolutely true. He wants to see Sermon, who has intrigue with Steichen. Yeah, I'd like to see Sermon he was talking this whole offseason about how he was trying to round out his game and be this pass catching back also, which we know that was an area he struggled in last year. Really, if he's just a between the tackles runner and like a downhill kind of guy, you kind of rely on him for that. You feel safe that he's going to pick up the yards that is blocked for him. But yeah, he was definitely a liability in the pass game. But yeah, if he's working on that and improving that part of his game, then that makes him an all around guy that you can rely on. I don't expect him to be more of a pass catching threat than any of the other running backs on the roster. But if he can at least get to the point where he's not a liability in that section of the game, then yeah, he's going to be valuable to have on the roster. I think you've got Taylor, who's obviously going to be able to make some plays in the passing game, and then Tyler Goodson, and then definitely Evan Hull, all fighting for that spot. That are definitely better receivers at this point than Sermon is. James with the shout out from Indiana, asking who I think is going to make the biggest impact on the team this season. And I feel like you can go with a cop out answer there and say Anthony Richardson, but I'm going to try to avoid that right now. So we're just saying biggest impact. I think I have an answer that would be fun, but I think that's not being truthful to myself. Here, we're going to just go with Latu on that. I think really getting that guy who has that extra gear in the pass rush. The Colts pass rush was already good last year. And then you drop a guy like it or like Latu in there, the first rounder who's expected to produce right away just because of how technically refined he is. He's a bit of an older rookie. So you kind of expect him to have his feet under him once he gets going in week one. So I think right when the season starts, you should see an impact from Latu. And I think that's what the Colts are expecting. I think that's why they took him at 15, the first defensive player off the board. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of options there. Obviously, we're going to talk about Anthony Richardson and how him being there for the whole season is going to be a huge impact for the team. So if you're just measuring by pure impact, it would definitely be Anthony Richardson, but I feel like that's too easy of an answer. Sarah in the chat saying, "I hope Dalton Tucker makes the team." That is actually something I wanted to talk about anyway. Dalton Tucker, undrafted offensive guard out of Marshall, was kind of pushing for this roster spot. He's been working all summer at second team right guard, that immediate backup right behind Will Fries. And Will Fries in a contract year, no less. So it'd be good to kind of have that situation like that. Who's the heir apparent? If you can't bring back Will Fries, it'd be good to have that option on the roster. And Dalton Tucker might be one of those guys. So undrafted guy came out of, not really a lot of expectations. The Colts loaded up on offensive line in the draft with Tanner Bortolini and Matt Gonsalves, a tackle and a center, but both have experience playing guard, and both this past preseason game against the Cardinals did play some guard. But then you got Dalton Tucker, an undrafted free agent who comes in. He's been playing with the second team the entire time. So he was kind of already pushing for a roster spot. So I'm just going to pull up the depth chart here. And we've got Will Fries right over here at right guard and Dalton Tucker right behind him. Before this, Josh Sills was a guy on the team last season, an experienced vet who has experience along the interior. But yeah, Josh Sills was waived yesterday with an injury designation. So if he'll clear waivers, he'll go to the Colts injured reserve list. But either way, that puts him out for the year. Then you had another, they signed center Ryan Cole, who was also put on IR. So kind of all the guys that they're kind of reinforcements that they're signing on the interior are kind of dropping off. And then Dalton Tucker seems to be the guy that's performing and the guy that's left standing. I think later in the show, we will go over kind of what I see a 53-man roster looking like at this point. I wanted to do that because I believe roster cuts are the 27th. And we've got a preseason game on Thursday. So I will do one show today, and then there'll be a preseason game. And then my next show on Friday will be the last one before the roster cuts come. So I kind of wanted to lay out kind of how I see the 53 looking at this point, and then going from there, seeing what changes or what we're watching for during the preseason game. And then coming back on Friday after the game and kind of finalizing that prediction after training camp is over, after the preseason's over. So we can get my final prediction on that 53 set in stone. But today I definitely want to go over kind of what I'm looking at as we go into the game on Thursday. James back in the chat. Yeah, one more question. You can send as many as you like, James. Do you think Alec Pierce is going to have a good season this year? Alec Pierce has definitely underperformed in terms of production. I know the coaching staff loves him. He's getting a ton of snaps on offense because of his ability to block and his ability to run these routes. I think I read last year that he ran the most yards of any receiver in the NFL. Not with the ball, certainly not. He didn't get the ball that much, but yeah, in terms of the amount of go routes and runoffs that he had to do and the deep routes that they were asking him to run, and just the lack of deep shots that Gardner Minshew took towards him. I think it would be nice to see that kind of payoff for him, all the just kind of dirty work that he put in for the Colts offense last year. I think he can still be a deep threat guy. We saw him make that catch with that great Anthony Richardson throw against the Rams with Aaron Donald in his face, going down deep. So hopefully we see more of that this season with Richardson just prepared and willing to throw it deep to a guy like Pierce, who is a deep kind of jump ball specialist. So yeah, I think Anthony Richardson being the quarterback is going to do a lot of wonders for Alec Pierce. Although he does have AD Mitchell, the rookie receiver, kind of fighting for those snaps a little bit. So his playing time might go down. He might not see as many snaps, but I do expect him to get targeted a higher percentage of snaps than he did last season. Drake asking, outside of Tucker, is there an offensive line that has impressed or disappointed you the most? Uh, there's definitely one that's disappointed. I think that's disappointed everybody. That's Blake Freeland, the left tackle. I guess just the offensive tackle, but getting his snaps at left tackle, and he was a guy who played a lot of snaps last season. Which, to be fair to Blake Freeland, tough ask to ask a rookie to come in and play a lot of starting snaps at tackle, let alone both tackle spots. So he's switching from left to right. He's switching from right to left, and that's kind of flipping the muscle memory and the flipping his pass sets for a guy that already was sort of a developmental guy trying to gain strength coming into the NFL. I don't think they expected him to play a lot early, but they forced him to, and he definitely got burnt because of that. So you kind of hope that that baptism by fire was all that he needed to, like, that was it. And then he would kind of take that next step this summer. He hasn't seemed to have done that. The last two preseason games have definitely been rough. And by all accounts, at all the practices, the practices have been pretty indicative of what the preseason games have turned out to be. So I don't think he's impressing in practices. He's definitely not impressing in the preseason games. So I think that's disappointing. The one good thing you have is you've got Matt Gonsalves there, sitting there on the right side. He's been manning the right side most of the time. So those two have kind of been competing for that swing tackle spot. So you're happy you have Matt Gonsalves on the roster, because if you were just banking on Freeland to be that far and away swing left or the swing tackle, then I think you would have been disappointed. So it's good to have Gonsalves to compete with him to be that guy. Now Gonsalves has kind of had some ups and downs. He's shown, I think, flashes that have been better than Blake Freeland's flashes at this point in the summer. So I think coming up this week, you'd like to see on the game Thursday, you'd like to see Matt Gonsalves take some left tackle snaps. I know you're kind of doing the same thing that you did to Freeland last week or last season, where you're switching him from left to right. But I think you really got to figure out going into the season who's that next man up at the tackle spots, and you have to be willing to give Gonsalves those snaps to figure that out, I think. Richie saying he can see them cutting Blake Freeman, or Blake Freeland, which is very topical. Richie, Drake did do a piece this week about how Blake has kind of emerged as a surprising cut candidate who's possible. I just don't think they have the depth at tackle to do that at this point. So when they're making the final 53 and they're going through, I expect him to make that final 53. Now, whether or not he ends up being like behind Gonsalves, if Gonsalves is the swing or the immediate backup at left and right, and Freeland's just kind of sitting there, I don't think they're going to throw away the development that they kind of put into him, because they knew he needed that coming in. But I mean, if they see somebody hit the waiver wire that they might like at offensive tackle, then I think maybe those coming days after the 53 will be the most telling for how they feel about Freeland. Rich saying he agrees with Sarah. Hope Tucker makes it. Laquan Treadwell had hands like glue on Saturday, 7 targets, 7 catches. Some of them weren't easy catches. Yeah, so Laquan Treadwell as was kind of a weird signing coming in. You didn't expect him to go for a former first round picks, been with what, 8 teams at this point. So you don't really know what you're expecting out of a guy like that. Yeah, he's been getting all these reps in training camp just with the developmental squads that kind of go after the main practice has ended. So he's catching passes from Keaton Slovis and running routes with like Derek Sluka and Tyree Cleveland out there on the field with him. So I mean, yeah, he's not getting those early team reps, but when you throw him out there with those third teamers, those people that are kind of battling for roster spots, you threw him out there in the preseason, and it seemed like he was a first round pick. It seemed like he was the best guy on the field, and it wasn't really close. So it's I don't think that at this point in his career you're going to get much more out of him than what he's already been. But I do think he was worth kicking the tires on. He's definitely auditioning for 31 other teams that might want to take a shot on him. But with how crowded the Colts wide receiver room, unless they can sneak him onto the practice squad, um, which I don't know if that would be sneaking at this point, just because of how well known his name is and how long he's been out there on the free agents. I don't think you're sneaking him, but I think you could bring him back on the practice squad. He could be one of those guys. So if we're looking at the receivers right now, I'm not going to say for sure that they're keeping 6, but if you just kind of highlight these guys here that you think they're going to keep, which would be those 4, Anthony Gold, 5th, and then Doolin and Montgomery are kind of fighting for 5 and 6. If they keep 5, then Doolin and Montgomery are out. Doolin might find a job elsewhere in the NFL, but I mean, if they could have him back on the practice squad, they'd love it. I'm just not sure that's a reasonable expectation just because of how well he's performed on special teams. Montgomery is a guy I could see them cutting and bringing back onto the practice squad. And if you want more than one guy on the practice squad, which with a 16-person practice squad, I feel like that's pretty likely, especially if you're keeping 5 wide receivers. I would expect them to keep 2 or 3 receivers on the practice squad, which might come from other teams' cuts, but they do have some guys in house like Montgomery and Winfrey that they like, and then Laquan Treadwell. Maybe that could be a guy that they take a shot on. Drake saying that was a fun piece about Freeland being a cut candidate. Yeah, they can't lose tackles. Yeah, they've got 3 if they cut Freeland. So you've got on the roster right now Jake Witt, who coming out of college was drafted the same draft as Blake Freeland, but he was drafted in the 7th, I want to believe. Uh, Let me fact check that before I put that out into the ether. He was drafted in the 7th, yeah. Pick 236. So he was drafted in the 7th, kind of the same profile as Freeland. This 6'7", like low 300-pound tackles who kind of need to gain this play strength and technique, but they have that body type. They have the agility if they can flesh them out. Witt's been a guy who was hurt his rookie season and hasn't really gotten a ton of reps. Yeah, I don't think I've seen him play with the 2s at all in training camp or the preseason. So I'm not sure if he's a guy that's rosterable at this point, but definitely a guy that they would probably want to see continue to develop on the practice squad. But yeah, so if they're getting rid of Freeland, Arlington Hambright is a guy who's been on the active roster for spurts and been in the practice squad. Kind of a guard who can kick out to tackle, who's been playing mostly tackle. So I mean, he's a guy, but I'm not sure he's a guy you want to keep on the roster. So if you're going with Freeland, then you've got those 4. And I think that's the most likely thing to happen on cut down day on the 27th. But yeah, I would say they're probably keeping an eye out for what else is happening on the waiver wire. I'm sure they like Blake Freeland, but if they see a guy that they like better, I don't think they would hesitate to pull the trigger. So far in his history, Ballard hasn't shown to be the guy who kind of sits back, and I think he knows when to move on for the most part. He doesn't kind of sit on the laurels of the draft pick and doesn't have sort of that ego. He definitely comes across as thinking he's the smartest person in the room, but I don't think he would hold on to a guy for the worst of the team. And I think we've seen that with guys like Darius Rush, a 5th-round corner who he praised when he drafted, and then cut him during roster cuts just because of he was outplayed by some other people on the roster. So if Blake Freeland doesn't pick it up in practices before cuts or in this preseason game, then he could be a guy they move on. Richard saying, I wonder why the Cincinnati media isn't reporting that their first team offense failed to score a single touchdown, including getting 10 plays in the red zone where Jalen Jones had two possible picks. Yeah, I'm, I'm not, I mean, I wasn't there to see it, but there was definitely some reports, a lot of Colts reports saying that the defense struggled early on and then kind of picked it up there at the end. I think it was probably back and forth. I'm not sure that the Cincinnati media should be too worried about the Bengals offense not scoring in the red zone. Um, I think kind of the red zone should be where the Colts defense kind of, or at least their secondary kind of sticks up. They don't have to worry about that deep speed on the outside. They've got big, long corners like Juju Brents and Jalen Jones who can be physical. From what I saw last season when the Colts were in the red zone, their difficulties with their corners and their safeties was mostly communication based and not getting to the right zones, and less of like these one-on-one losses that you would kind of expect out of rookies. Um, but yeah, I'm definitely saw some reporting from the Colts side or from the Colts media that Colts offense wasn't doing well. Um, I'm sure the Bengals offense wasn't as bad as we're making it out to be in that first or in that red zone period. And of course, there were other periods throughout the practice that I'm sure they definitely got the better of the secondary on. One other thing I wanted to bring up the defensive line outlook. So we've gotten a lot of narrative shift on Adetomiwa Adebawore here, who's kind of come along last season, got some playing time, not a lot, and kind of left a lot to be desired. Didn't kind of have that play strength to hold up in the run game and wasn't really sophisticated enough as a pass rusher. He's always had these athletic traits that are just freaky. So you're kind of hoping he could be that guy. And I know this is kind of a theme with all these Ballard picks that we're talking about, where they have these athletic traits and you're kind of banking on them to develop. Some do, some don't. But it looks like this offseason, Tommy put that work in. He started to develop. He's really kind of took off this past preseason game with his pass rushing. And you've kind of seen that. So you're kind of looking at him to maybe come in and be that NASCAR package, third down for sure rushing. I don't think you really want him out there on any rundowns. But when you're straight up rushing the power or passer, he could be somebody that gets in that rotation and gets valuable snaps, get valuable hurries, especially combined with all these edge rushers. Then today, Raekwon Davis also came back. So this defensive line really kind of getting those reinforcements that they needed. This kind of has a domino effect. Raekwon Davis coming back because you've had Taven Bryan, who's been he should be a three tech. The Colts have played him kind of a lot at nose tackle, and then which is I feel like is out of position. He hasn't performed well there. I feel like most people feel like that's out of position. The Colts continue to list him at nose tackle on the depth chart, but I do think his true position would be a three tech. And when you get a guy like Raekwon Davis back who can be that backup nose tackle who can spell Grover Stewart, who can be that guy up the middle, then you don't have to rely on Taven Bryan to be that guy. Because I can see kind of why they've been doing it with Bryan, putting him at nose tackle without Raekwon Davis in the lineup. Because other than that, you've got Adebawore, who's not a nose tackle. You've got Eric Johnson, who was a late round draft pick, who they've kind of been hoping would turn into something, but just has had sort of every opportunity this summer to take that nose tackle spot or that backup nose tackle spot since Raekwon was out for so long, but really failed to do that and kind of had a rough showing against the Cardinals. Had a rough showing in week one also. The entire interior defensive line was kind of getting pushed back on every run play. So he didn't take over that spot. So kind of forcing Taven Bryan to fill in that gap. But now playing him at three tech, Taven Bryan could just be a straight up rush the passer kind of guy, kind of like Adebawore is. So you've got Adebawore coming along and you've got Raekwon Davis coming back. It kind of puts everybody where they need to be. And I think that kind of has that domino effect to really affect that whole defensive line. Richard asking, any chance Ade supplants Dio as the third down interior rusher? And I think you're going to see some of that this season. I don't think he's going to be straight up supplanting him because I know Dio's had a good summer too. But yeah, I think interior rushers, when it comes down to that, you've got a few options on the roster already. Obviously, Buckner is going to be in there on rundowns, and he's going to be in there on pass downs just because he's He's that disruptive. He's such a well-rounded player. Taven Bryan, I feel like should be supplanted at this point by Adebawore, but they've been playing him out of position so much. He was on the team last year, became a free agent, and they chose to bring him back. So obviously the staff sees something in him that they like or wanted to continue reaching out for. But then you've got Taekwon Lewis and Dio Adengbo who can kick in and be those sort of bigger ins on the outside on early downs, and then bump in and be like those quicker finesse guys on the inside on rush downs. So I mean, they're spoiled for choice when it comes to those third down rush packages. Adebawore could definitely be one of those guys, and he's going to get into the rotation. I expect him to make the roster, not be a practice squad bouncing up and down kind of guy. So I expect him to make that roster, and I do expect him to get some snaps. And then you just have to hope that production comes in the regular season, and then before he gets that more regular role. Richie also asking about my feelings about Nick Cross, which I feel like I've always been kind of a little more level-headed than what it seems like people have been. There was just a lot of overreaction. I feel like because of the timing of what happened with that injury to Josh Downs in practice, combined with the poor performance that he was having in the weeks prior, and then combine that with the fact that Justin Simmons was available as a free agent. So if we kind of just look at him how he is and take away the context of those safeties that were available that the fans kind of wanted the Colts to sign, and kind of ignore that outside noise. And then I know it's not as easy to ignore the fact that he caused an injury to Josh Downs during a 7-on-7 in a bonehead play that you didn't have to make. Um, but if you're ignoring those two things, because I would consider that a fluky situation, I don't think that's something that's going to be a recurring theme with Nick Cross. It's going to cause him issues. I feel like he got a little bit of an unfair rap just because he's a guy desperately trying to grab onto a roster spot that needs to make a play and is probably being told from outside people and people inside the building that he needs to be making plays. So he probably went all out on that play, and it was a little bit unnecessary after the whistle, causing that injury to Josh Downs. But I don't think that's going to be a recurring thing. I don't think that's been an issue with Nick Cross getting in scraps or being a dirty player, especially towards his own teammates. So if we're ignoring those things and we just look at his production, which hasn't been good, but I don't think it's been enough that like some people were talking about him being a cut candidate early. I think that's definitely extreme, not something I would go to. And I think that it's also extreme to assume that he should be the starter unquestioned. I think the Colts kind of gave it a good mix early in preseason and training camp where they were rotating these guys, Nick Cross and Ronnie Harrison and Rodney Thomas in the back end. And from there, it became pretty clear that Nick Cross and Ronnie Harrison kind of stepped out above Rodney Thomas. And I trust the staff's evaluation on that. And then there was that time. I don't know if you guys remember that practice a few weeks ago where Julian Blackman, it was reported that he was playing some free safety instead of just purely in a strong safety spot. And kind of everybody was thinking, oh, we don't believe in Nick Cross back deep anymore. But then since then, he's been shifting into strong safety. He had a big performance at strong safety last week, and then he's been playing in a free safety still. So it's not like they've lost trust in him back deep. I just think kind of what they've been grooming is these two guys who can kind of interchange at spots. And while they might both excel more at strong safety, you kind of in a defense where Gus Bradley has been so predictable and the coverages aren't disguised that much. And you're kind of expecting what coverage is called based on the situation, and he doesn't deviate from that too much. I feel like it's nice to be able to have an opponent walk up to the line of scrimmage, see Julian Blackman 32, see Nick Cross 20, and not know necessarily just based off their number what kind of responsibility they're going to have during that play. I think that's going to be valuable for the defense, and they can mix things up with that if they have these two guys who can play both spots. I think ideally Nick Cross would be your strong safety, and Julian Blackman would be the guy back at free safety. So I feel like a mistake at free safety is a little less costly than a mistake at strong safety, or a little more costly at strong safety. So you want that good communicator, you want that veteran presence back there that can kind of put out fires if fires need to be put out. But yeah, there were definitely better options at safety or options that could have pushed the competition on the roster. They didn't go that route. They stayed indoor or stayed in their facility and then internal and kept Nick Cross in there. Nick Cross kind of emerged as the guy at safety other than Julian Blackman. So I'm going to trust that going forward into the regular season. I feel like the chance of an outside acquisition, anything super major, has come and gone. So anything that would happen at this point would be a depth piece. So you're going to go into week one with Nick Cross and Julian Blackman being your two safeties at that spot. Richard asking, do you think Land can have a decent role this season if he makes the 53? He's been really impressed with him. Yeah, so Isaiah Land is a guy who was brought in off waivers after roster cuts last season. So he wasn't with the Colts for training camp. Was cut by the Cowboys during the roster cut downs and then claimed on waivers. When I'm going through the 53 trying to make this, he's kind of one of those guys that is in that range from like your 50th best player to your 57th best player. He's in that range. So he's kind of like a 50-50 shot of if he makes the roster or not. And that's all going to depend on who you keep at other spots, whether you keep 4 running backs, whether you keep 6 receivers. I guess now you're not keeping 5 tight ends, so maybe that makes it a little more likely that he makes the roster. One good thing that he has going for him is that Chris Ballard loves keeping defensive end or defensive tackles, defensive ends, defensive linemen. He loves having waves of guys. He's never gonna say he has too many on the defensive line. So I think if you're going extra at a spot, defensive line is highly likely that that's the one they keep. When you're looking at the defensive ends at this point, I think you've got your clear 4 there, and then a 5th, if they keep a 5th, would be Isaiah Land. Last year during roster cuts, they kept 4 defensive ends, which is these 3, and then instead of Latu, they had Ebukam, who they kept, and then they kept 6 defensive tackles, I believe. I don't expect that this year. This was also the same year that they had 3 wide receivers before week 1. So they're probably not going to have a surplus that extreme at that position, but I would expect 9 defensive linemen at least. So you're going with either 5 ends and 4 tackles or 4 ends and 5 tackles. So I guess it just kind of depends on that other spot. I think Land can have an impact being that guy. He's definitely, when he's come in, he produced a little bit last year. He's come in this offseason, shown improvement. He's kind of definitely made the case for himself on the 53. So I do hope he has a different, he does make the roster. I'm hoping he does. And they move on from a guy like, I don't know, maybe if they keep 4 defensive tackles, hopefully that would be like DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart and Raekwon Davis, and then Adebawore and Brian would be the other 2 that I think are up for it. So if they're keeping 4, then maybe you dip out on Taven Bryan, you keep a guy like Isaiah Land on defense. Sean, my buddy over at Horseshoe Huddle, says outside of Pitt, what Colts receiver do you see finishing with the most catches? And I'm going to say Josh Downs. I think notwithstanding this injury of the ankle injury that might keep him out week 1, week 2, I think even if he misses those first 2 weeks, he's going to be that guy that comes away with more catches than Pierce or Mitchell. Just because Pierce and Mitchell are battling for that playing time. Staff loves Pierce. They're going to give him his reps. So unless AD Mitchell comes out week 1 while Josh Downs is out and he's playing in that slot, he's proven to be a super reliable guy and claiming like a full-time starting spot, which I think he would really have to go off to do. I think Josh Downs will be the guy that gets. I mean, he might even rival Pitt in terms of catches. I guess it depends on health and everything throughout the season. But I would say, yeah, Josh Downs is that clear number 2, if not a 1B. Gregory saying goodbye to Woods. Yeah, we'll say goodbye to Woods. Jelani Woods temporarily because of that injury. I'm not going to say goodbye permanently. I think the need for that actually kind of decreases with his injury, since you have room to keep Will Mallory on the 53 and you can keep Jelani Woods on IR to keep him in the building, keep him on the roster, but not on the final 53 active roster, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think it's not the best thing that could have happened for him. Obviously, he can't catch a break. The best thing that would have happened as he was healthy. It wasn't a serious injury. He balls out this preseason game and he secures that tight end 4 spot. But I think this does buy him some time, unless the Colts are just tired of it and ready to move on. Which a guy with that kind of athletic profile, I struggle to see. Rich saying he needs to see Matt Gay hit some field goals this week. He doesn't want to have to worry every Sunday about securing 3 points when we are in the 35 to 45 yard range like Blankenship. Yeah, so I did actually have this on my list of things that I kind of wanted to go over. I just labeled that kicker woes because we may or may not have them. I'm kind of in this camp that don't really worry about it so much. Is kind of how I'm thinking about it. You missed that one week 1 in the preseason, which was a 50+ yarder, which I'm not too worried about it. He pulled it left, like all the 3 that he's missed so far. But last week, when he missed those 2, he had rookie Spencer Schrader in there holding for him, a guy who hasn't held in a game, at least hasn't been working on it this whole preseason, this whole training camp. So I think if you go back and you watch him, that first kick that he misses with Spencer Schrader holding, uh, you can tell he just kind of looks at Spencer Schrader and kind of gives him a pat on the back, like reassuring him because the laces were facing towards Matt Gay. So that was obviously a mistake on Schrader's part. And a holder can make a kicker miss no matter what the kicker does. So I think when you're kind of gauging his accuracy, you're definitely taking the last game with a grain of salt because you're not sure what the kind of the hitches were with the setup with Schrader. Did his timing get thrown off? The second hold that Schrader had, the laces were facing out. The Matt Gay didn't give him that pat on the back like he did something wrong, and he was reassuring him. So that might have just been a straight up Matt Gay miss where he pulled it to the left, but also could have been a disruption in the timing, the way that he held it, just things that he wasn't used to because he's used to having Rigo back there, which we should see in the regular season, the entire season if we're lucky. So, kicker is also a spot where if you're playing a game tomorrow and you're going for a 50-yard field goal, despite kind of the troubles that Matt Gay has had these 2 preseason games, are you feeling more confident having him kick a 50-yarder or somebody you can get off the street right now? And I feel like your chances are just as good that Matt Gay hits that kick, even with the kind of what he's been weathering through, than some random street free agent kicker that you can bring in. Another big thing that you have to think about when you're talking about Matt Gay, and if you should do anything about it, he's making 5.92 million this year, or that's how much he counts against the cap. And it's like guaranteed through the next 3 years of a lot of his contracts. So if you're cutting him, you're actually taking on almost 10 million in dead cap. So you're paying him that full 6 million that he's due this year, and then another 4 million on top of that. So you're losing money just by cutting him, which the Colts aren't in the business of, and they shouldn't be. And you're doing that for what would be a marginal improvement, if any improvement at all, at the kicker spot. All right, so we're probably going to go about 45, 50 minutes, but I did want to go through the 53-man roster projection, just going through all these positions, just position by position, kind of seeing where the tough cuts are at so we can kind of decide where or kind of what we're looking at when we go forward this preseason game. So I'll do this show, and then we'll do another one after the preseason game. That'll be the last Shoehorn podcast before the roster cuts come in, and then I'll do one on roster cut day on the 27th. So this one we'll be kind of going over what we're looking for, and then I'll make my final prediction come Friday. But we're kind of don't want to give this away too fast. I'm just going to zoom out here. I kind of went through. This is based a lot on what happened last year in terms of positions they were keeping, like the number of players at the positions that they kept last season. And this was also before Jelani Woods, the injury was revealed about Jelani Woods. So we'll go over that. We can make adjustments on that. But just taking a look at it right now, there's been some discourse at QB, whether you're keeping Sam Ellinger on the roster. The Colts have always kept 3 on the roster, especially last year. They had 3 on the roster. Sam Ellinger is, I don't think, a guy that you're going to pass through waivers and get back on your practice squad. And even if you do get him on the practice squad, that emergency quarterback rule or the San Francisco 49ers rule from last year that just got put in place, the player has to be on the active roster during the game in order for you to put him in if you need that third emergency quarterback. So if Richardson goes down, old man Flacco takes a spill, then you've got Sam Ellinger. Would have to be on your active roster for him to come in as that third player. He would be inactive on the game day, but would have to be on your 53 for him to come in. If you put him on the practice squad, even if you could pass him through waivers, you can only bring him up to the active roster for game day 3 times, I believe, 3 or 4 times throughout the year. So I feel like they haven't really taken risks at quarterback in terms of going with 2 guys. So I feel like I expect Sam Ellinger to be there. Getting rid of him would free up a roster spot elsewhere, which maybe is a decision they're going to have to make because this is a pretty talented group in terms of or relative to at least to the last few years that they've been looking at. This one is a controversial pick, I'm sure, because I have the Colts keeping 3 running backs currently, just because that's what they did last season. Is what they kept 3. Jonathan Taylor was on PUP, so the 3 that they kept were Sermon, Goods, or no, it wasn't. It was Zach Moss and Deion Jackson and Evan Hull in week 1. They didn't have Sermon and Goodson yet, but they kept 3, and that was with Zach Moss dealing with that arm injury, so you weren't even sure if he was going to be there week 1. And they were still comfortable having 3 on the roster, even with 1 that was iffy on whether or not he was going to be healthy. So when you've got 3 fully healthy guys, assuming Trey Sermon's hamstring injury isn't going to nag into the regular season, then I think they're comfortable with 3 guys. The question then becomes, if you're only keeping 3, you have to make a decision between Goodson and Hull. And despite it seeming like Hull is like this shiny new thing because he was drafted 2 years ago, he missed his rookie year, so he hasn't had a lot of playing time. Tyler Goodson, I think, is remarkably similar. I think they're like 5 days apart, and Tyler Goodson's like 5 days younger than Evan Hull is. So it's not like you're opting for youth if you go with Hull over Goodson, because Goodson's actually younger. Goodson has, I think, outperformed Hull slightly. I'm not going to say that Hull's been disappointing or anything because I don't think he has. I just think Tyler Goodson's kind of taken a step and proven to be that running back 3 at this point. Drake and Andrew were doing the podcast yesterday. They were talking about kind of that battle for running back 3, and I hopped in and I said Tyler Goodson's running back 3, and it's not close. I think that was a little hyperbolic. I think it is close. Just kind of saying that for fun, but I do think he is running back 3 right now. So if you're keeping 3, I think it would be Goodson at this point. Receiver, I had them keeping 5. We all know last year they went in with 3 right before the week 1, and they just had some of the veteran guys on the practice squad that they were able to bring up. So that was in this instance, have them keeping 5, which would be your Pittman, Downs, Pearson, Mitchell, Anthony Gould, and then you're kind of wondering whether they keep Ashton Doolin or DJ Montgomery. I don't think it's going to be both because 7 would be too many to carry. Doolin, despite how good he was on special teams or how good he has been on special teams, has not been on the field with Shane Steichen and hasn't gotten those reps to kind of prove himself in the Steichen offense. So you're kind of wondering whether or not Ashton Doolin can kind of show his value with the new coaching staff. And then you've got DJ Montgomery, who has impressed in preseason and was a guy that they relied on last season. So Doolin not making it in this projection. We'll see kind of since he's healthy and he was back at practice today. We'll kind of see if he is that guy and he gets in at offense and he gets in these reps and can prove himself to make the roster. Tight ends, I had 5, which obviously I think at this point is not going to happen. Jelani Woods is not going to be on the active roster at least. So a couple people talked about him being a cut candidate now, but I think he's just going to go on to IR. He's going to go on to PUP if they have to, depending on the timetable for his injury. So then you've got the obvious 4 of Granson, Allie Cox, and Ogletree and Mallory. So that actually in this projection frees up one spot. Offensive line, I have them keeping 9. I don't think they keep less than 9. Um, they've liked to keep 10 on the roster. So if you want to bring one back, that would be in this situation, Danny Pinter. I think kind of all these injuries on the interior offensive line, you've kind of seen kind of it clear up. There's not a ton of battles except for whether you keep Danny Pinter or Dalton Tucker or you keep both. I think Gonsalves and Bortolini are both safe, and Blake Freeland, just because of the position that he plays and kind of the trust that they've put on him in the past, I think he's going to make it. Then you move on to defense, and we talked a little bit about Isaiah Land and whether he would not or whether or not he would make it. And we talked about Tommy, kind of him improving in the scheme. Then you've got Taven Bryan, who in this situation I cut. So in this projection, they're keeping 9 defensive linemen. I think ideally they would want 10, um, which maybe that would be the first place that they keep. So I'm actually gonna throw Taven Bryan back on there since Jelani wouldn't be making it in this instance. And that would be their 10 defensive linemen, 5 defensive tackles, 5 defensive ends. I think they would be happy with that. Linebackers, I've got them keeping 5. Speed Franklin, Shagun, Jalen Carlisle, and then Grant Stewart is going to be a special teams guy. Maybe with the new kickoff rules, they want more linebacker bodies on their team. So maybe they keep Cameron McGrone. Craig Young could be a practice squad candidate. Austin Jakey's been impressing. Mike Smith just got here. Liam Anderson's kind of been fallen by the wayside a little bit. So I would say at this point, I'm still sticking with these 5. And then at corners, kind of where it gets interesting because you've got rookies who are right on the roster bubble. You've got a 5th rounder in Jalen Simpson, who I have not making it at this point, which would be really similar to Darius Rush, a 5th round corner rookie last year, who also didn't make the roster. So it's not unheard of for them to move on so quickly from a corner. And I think him being a 5th round pick, it's likely that he would get claimed, though they would like to have him back, I'm sure. But then you're kind of banking on special teams when you're looking at these outside spots. Your Speed, Daryl Baker, Jalen Simpson, kind of upside that you see in between these guys and special teams ability. That's how you're deciding between those 3. Then at the nickel here, so that would be 5, 6 corners, I think would be ideal. Especially if you're keeping these 4, then you kind of need somebody to back up Kenny Moore because I don't think you want Julian Blackman to shoulder that load of being that straight up backup nickel spot because then you're kind of hurting at safety. So I had them keeping Micah Abraham. I think it could be either Abraham or Lamons. I think you could go either way. Lamons, I think, is a guy you could get on the practice squad. Abraham might also be 2, but I feel like you take the risk. You run with the rookie here just for development purposes. And then at safety, I have him keeping 5. Trevor Denbo is going to make the roster just because of how important he is on special teams. He's not going to get a lot of defensive snaps. I'm not sure they want him to get a lot of defensive snaps. He's been playing at free safety when he's been taking those snaps, but I think you do keep these 4. Rodney Thomas has been a guy that's talked about on the roster bubble. I'm not sure he is going to get that far down in the doghouse where they're willing to move on from him unless somebody extremely appealing shows up on the waiver wire. But yeah, I think these 5 would be here. So kind of guys that you're looking at to perform this preseason game to kind of steal a spot away. I mean, there's going to be a lot of practice squad guys that you're watching to make the practice squad, but in terms of roster spots, I think it's going to be important to pay attention to the rotation between Goodson and Hull. And kind of see where they're at for 3 and 4. It's going to be important to see Ashton Doolin, see if he's playing on all the special teams units and seeing if he's getting any offensive snaps and kind of what his offensive snaps versus a guy like DJ Montgomery or Jawan Winfrey or Laquan Treadwell, what those reps kind of look like. I think the second team offensive line is going to be pretty set in stone when they're going out there. But you need to be watching Danny Pinter. He needs to have a strong performance, I think, to make it. Dalton Tucker also needs to stack his strong performance to secure a spot. And then Eric Johnson, I think it's a long shot that he makes the roster at this point. But I do think they like him. They would like him back on the practice squad, but maybe he balls out and can make an impact. And then you're looking at the linebackers also. Cameron McGrone, a special teams guy, seeing how his snaps kind of line up with other guys that he's competing with, which I would say in his category would be Craig Young and Austin Ajaki. And then we're looking at kind of just watching, paying a close eye on the rookie corners, Simpson and Abraham, and seeing kind of where they're at in the lineup, whether they're behind Speed, Baker, Lamons, who gets the more snaps, just to kind of find out where they're at and who they're trusting more at this point. That isn't necessarily an indicator of who's going to get it for sure, but I do think, yeah, we're looking at those snaps for those guys. All right. I think we pretty much hit on anything. The thing I had on the list was to go over whether or not we can keep 5 tight ends, but I don't think that's a possibility at this point, or a really a likely scenario at this point anymore with the Jelani Woods injury. So we've got tomorrow. The Colts have an off day, so that we wrapped up training camp. Tomorrow will be the day before the final preseason game. So on the Horseshoe Huddle channel, you'll be able to watch the Horseshoe Huddle podcast with Andrew Moore and Drake Wally. They'll be doing their podcast, their last one before the final preseason game. Then we'll have the preseason game on Thursday. And then I'll come back at you with the Shoehorn pod to kind of give the final prediction and see what's changed throughout the 53-man roster predictions. And we'll hit that on Friday. So if that's all we've got, then that's all we've got. I hope you guys have a good night. I appreciate you joining me, and I'll see you on Friday.